July 26, 1944, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Two men sat across from President Franklin D. Roosevelt in a mansion overlooking the Pacific. This meeting would determine the strategy for winning the war against Japan. Millions of lives hung in the balance. On Roosevelt's left, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief, Pacific Fleet. Quiet, methodical, strategic thinker. Nimitz represented the U.S. Navy's vision for defeating Japan, island hopping across the Central Pacific, bypassing heavily defended positions, strangling Japan's supply lines, and eventually invading the home islands. On Roosevelt's right, General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Commander, Southwest Pacific Area. Charismatic, political, driven by ego and genuine strategic vision, MacArthur represented the U.S. Army's approach: return to the Philippines, liberate American territory and millions of Filipino people, then use the Philippines as a base for invading Japan. The Navy's plan: bypass the Philippines. They weren't strategically necessary. Island hop from the Marianas through Iwo Jima and Okinawa directly to Japan. Save lives, end the war faster. MacArthur's plan: return to the Philippines, was a moral obligation. America had promised to liberate the Filipino people. Abandoning them would be a betrayal. And strategically, the Philippines controlled sea lanes essential to Japan's war effort. But this wasn't really about strategy. It was about two massive egos, two service rivalries, and two fundamentally different visions of American power in the post-war Pacific. Roosevelt knew it. He'd called this meeting not to decide strategy based on military merit, but to manage the political reality that whichever plan he chose would create a powerful enemy. Choose Nimitz's plan, and MacArthur would become a vocal critic, potentially undermining the administration and the war effort. Choose MacArthur's plan, and the Navy would fight the decision through bureaucratic resistance and might sacrifice efficiency to protect service interests. Roosevelt needed both men. He couldn't afford to alienate either, so he would do what politicians do. He'd choose both plans, creating a compromise that satisfied neither man, but preserved both egos. This is the story of the greatest strategic debate of the Pacific War. Not a debate about tactics or operations, but about power, politics, and two titanic personalities who would reshape the Pacific while battling each other as fiercely as they battled the Japanese. The personalities: MacArthur and Nimitz. To understand the strategic debate, you must understand the men. Douglas MacArthur, the political general. Born 1880, son of a Civil War hero and Medal of Honor recipient, graduated West Point first in his class in 1903, served in the Philippines, Japan, and World War I, became Army Chief of Staff in 1930, commanded Philippine forces before World War II. MacArthur was brilliant and charismatic, egotistical to the point of megalomania, politically connected and media savvy, genuinely talented at operational planning, obsessed with his own legacy and historical image, absolutely convinced of his own genius. He referred to himself in the third person. He staged photographs. He gave dramatic speeches. He crafted his public image meticulously. He believed he was destined for greatness and that history would vindicate his every decision. He was also legitimately one of the best operational commanders in the U.S. military. His island-hopping campaigns in the Southwest Pacific were masterpieces of economy of force, achieving maximum results with minimum casualties. But his ego was matched only by his political skill. He cultivated relationships with congressmen, journalists, and Republican Party leaders. He was untouchable politically. Firing him would create a political firestorm that could damage Roosevelt's presidency. Chester Nimitz, the professional admiral, born 1885, graduated Naval Academy in 1905, served in submarines, battleships, and staff positions. became Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor, taking over a shattered force and rebuilding it into the most powerful navy in history. Nimitz was calm, thoughtful, and strategic, self-effacing and uncomfortable with publicity, intensely focused on winning the war efficiently, politically naive compared to MacArthur, willing to compromise and work within command structures, devoted to the Navy, but not to personal glory. Nimitz didn't seek headlines. He didn't cultivate political relationships. He focused on military effectiveness. He delegated to talented subordinates like Halsey and Spruance. He built consensus rather than demanding obedience. Where MacArthur was a political operator using military command as a platform, Nimitz was a military professional who found politics distasteful but necessary. The fundamental difference? MacArthur saw the Pacific War as his vehicle to historical greatness. Nimitz saw it as a problem to be solved efficiently. This difference would define their conflict. The strategic debate passed to Tokyo. By mid-1944, American forces had turned the tide in the Pacific. The question wasn't if Japan would be defeated, but how. The Navy planned Central Pacific Drive. Admiral Nimitz and the Navy proposed continue island hopping across the Central Pacific, Marshalls, Marianas, Carolines. Seize bases for B-29 bombers to strike Japan. Marianas achieved this by July 1944. Bypass the Philippines entirely. They weren't necessary for defeating Japan. Continue to Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Invade Japan from these forward bases. Advantages? Shorter supply lines across the Pacific. Could use superior naval power maximally. Avoided heavily defended Philippines. Potentially faster route to Japan. Would strangle Japan's access to resources from Southeast Asia. Disadvantages? Required massive naval operations. Abandoned millions of Filipinos still under Japanese occupation. Gave up strategically located islands in the Philippines. Could be seen as betraying American promises to return. The Army plan? Return to the Philippines. General MacArthur and the Army proposed. Continue advancing through New Guinea. Liberate the Philippines, starting with Mindanao in the south. Use Philippine bases for further operations. Cut Japan's sea lanes to Southeast Asian resources. Invade Japan from the Philippines. Advantages. Fulfilled moral obligation to liberate the Philippines. Severed Japan's access to oil, rubber, and other critical resources. Provided excellent bases for future operations. Aligned with American promises and propaganda about returning, would liberate millions of people under brutal Japanese occupation. Disadvantages? Required fighting through heavily defended islands. Longer supply lines from the US could lead to high casualties. Might not be necessary if Central Pacific route worked. The underlying question: were the Philippines strategically necessary, or did MacArthur want them for political and personal reasons? The backstory I shall return. March 1942, Corregidor, Philippines. As Japanese forces overran the Philippines, President Roosevelt ordered General MacArthur to evacuate to Australia to take command of Allied forces in the Southwest Pacific. MacArthur didn't want to leave. He felt it was dishonorable to abandon his troops, but he followed orders. Upon arriving in Australia, MacArthur made his famous statement, "I came through and I shall return." The political significance. Those three words, "I shall return," became MacArthur's personal promise to the Filipino people. They became a rallying cry. They were broadcast on radio. They appeared on propaganda materials. They also became a political commitment MacArthur could use as leverage. How could Roosevelt refuse to support MacArthur's return to the Philippines when MacArthur had publicly promised it? The strategic straitjacket. MacArthur's promise created political pressure to return to the Philippines regardless of strategic merit. Abandoning the Philippines would mean MacArthur's promise was broken. This would damage American credibility in Asia, create a political firestorm domestically, hand Republicans a weapon against Roosevelt, potentially damage MacArthur's ego to the point where he might become a political problem. The Navy recognized this. They knew MacArthur had maneuvered himself into a position where he couldn't be denied without major political cost. The bureaucratic battlefield Joint Chiefs of Staff. The formal arena for this strategic debate was the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the committee coordinating all U.S. military operations. The players: General George Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, MacArthur's superior, professionally respectful of MacArthur but personally wary of his political maneuvering. Admiral Ernest King, Chief of Naval Operations, aggressive advocate for Navy priorities, disliked MacArthur personally and distrusted his motives. General Henry Hap Arnold, Army Air Force Commander, focused on strategic bombing, generally aligned with Navy on bypassing the Philippines. Admiral William Leahy, Roosevelt's Chief of Staff and Chairman of JCS, Navy man but tried to be balanced. The dynamic? Marshall supported MacArthur's strategic position but with reservations. He recognized the political necessity of returning to the Philippines but questioned whether it needed to be the main effort. King adamantly opposed MacArthur's plan. He thought MacArthur was putting personal glory ahead of military efficiency. He argued the Navy's Central Pacific Drive was working brilliantly and didn't need Army operations in the Philippines to succeed. Arnold cared most about getting bases for his B-29 as the Marianas provided those bases. The Philippines weren't necessary for the air campaign. The problem: the Joint Chiefs couldn't reach consensus. The Army-Navy rivalry was too deep. MacArthur's political position was too strong. No one could authoritatively overrule him. This created paralysis at the strategic level, exactly what shouldn't happen during a war. The political maneuvering, MacArthur's masterclass. While Nimitz focused on military operations, MacArthur fought a parallel political campaign. The media strategy. MacArthur cultivated relationships with journalists. He gave interviews portraying himself as the hero of the Pacific, while subtly suggesting the Navy was getting more resources and credit than deserved. He released information about his campaigns that made them seem more dramatic and decisive than Nimitz's methodical island hopping. He ensured photographs showed him at the front, carefully staged but effective propaganda. The congressional strategy. MacArthur maintained relationships with Republican congressmen and senators. He couldn't openly oppose Roosevelt, that would be insubordination, but he could ensure Republicans knew his preferences and his belief that the Philippines must be liberated. This created political pressure on Roosevelt from the opposition party, pressure to support MacArthur's strategy or face political attacks. The public opinion strategy. MacArthur's promise to return to the Philippines resonated with the American public. Polls showed strong support for liberating the Philippines. Americans felt a moral obligation to the Filipino people who'd suffered under Japanese occupation. MacArthur encouraged this sentiment. He portrayed the Philippines as a test of American character. Would America keep its promises or abandon its friends? The result? By mid-1944, MacArthur had created a political environment where refusing to return to the Philippines was politically dangerous for Roosevelt. This was political maneuvering at the highest level, using media, Congress, and public opinion to constrain military strategy. The Navy's counterattack, King's campaign. Admiral King wasn't passive. He fought back through bureaucratic and strategic means. The strategic argument. King argued that the Navy's Central Pacific Drive had been spectacularly successful. Marshall's taken with light casualties. Marianas seized, providing B-29 bases. Japanese fleet damaged in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Supply lines shortened. Japan increasingly isolated. The Philippines weren't necessary. They were MacArthur's personal obsession. Bypassing them would save lives and end the war faster. The bureaucratic resistance. King used his control of naval resources to subtly resist MacArthur's plans. Ships assigned to Southwest Pacific operations were sometimes delayed or diverted. Supplies were prioritized for Central Pacific operations. This wasn't outright sabotage. That would be insubordination. But it was bureaucratic friction designed to make MacArthur's operations more difficult. The political limitation. King's problem was that he wasn't politically skilled like MacArthur. His arguments were purely military. He didn't understand how to manipulate public opinion or congressional pressure. And King's personality worked against him. He was abrasive, difficult, and made enemies easily. Even people who agreed with his strategy didn't want to support him personally. The fatal weakness. King couldn't overcome the political reality. MacArthur had promised to return to the Philippines. Breaking that promise was politically unacceptable regardless of strategic merit. King could argue military efficiency. MacArthur had public sentiment. In a democracy, public sentiment often wins. The Pearl Harbor meeting, Roosevelt's decision, July 1944. Roosevelt decided to personally adjudicate the MacArthur-Nimitz dispute. He called both men to Pearl Harbor for a meeting. This was unusual. Roosevelt rarely left Washington, and traveling to Hawaii during wartime was risky. But the strategic paralysis had to be broken. Roosevelt needed to make a decision and ensure both MacArthur and Nimitz would execute it. The meeting? Roosevelt, MacArthur, and Nimitz met for several hours over 2 days. Leahy and other staff were present for some discussions, but not all. MacArthur made his case passionately. Mr. President, the Philippines must be liberated. 17 million Filipinos are suffering under brutal Japanese occupation. I promised them I would return. America promised them liberation. Breaking that promise would be a moral failure and a strategic mistake. The Philippines control the sea lanes from Japan to Southeast Asia. Taking them cuts Japan's access to oil, rubber, and resources essential to their war effort. The Filipino people are our friends. They've been fighting as guerrillas, waiting for us to return. Abandoning them would be a betrayal of everything America stands for. And Mr. President, let me be direct. If we bypass the Philippines, I cannot be responsible for the political consequences. The American people will not accept abandoning our Filipino allies. This last statement was barely veiled threat. MacArthur was suggesting he might publicly oppose the decision if it went against him. Nimitz made his case more quietly. Mr. President, the Navy's Central Pacific Drive is working. We're advancing faster than projected with acceptable casualties. We've seized bases for the Army Air Force to bomb Japan directly. The Philippines aren't necessary to defeat Japan. We can bypass them, continue to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and invade Japan from there. Invading the Philippines means fighting through heavily defended islands. It means high casualties. It means diverting resources from the direct route to Japan. I understand the moral arguments about the Filipino people, but our primary obligation is to our own soldiers and sailors. The strategy that ends the war fastest, with fewest American casualties, should be our choice. Roosevelt's dilemma? Both arguments had merit, but Roosevelt was a politician before he was a strategist. He understood that this decision was as much political as military. Choosing Nimitz's plan would be militarily efficient, but politically dangerous. MacArthur would become a vocal critic. Republicans would attack Roosevelt for abandoning allies. Public opinion would turn against him. Choosing MacArthur's plan would satisfy political needs, but potentially cost lives and delay victory. The compromise. Roosevelt did what politicians do. He chose both. He approved MacArthur's return to the Philippines, but he also approved Nimitz's continued Central Pacific drive. The two operations would proceed in parallel. MacArthur would liberate the Philippines, starting with Leyte in October 1944. Nimitz would continue toward Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Both men got what they wanted. Neither got everything they wanted. The strategic confusion continued. The Leyte decision, the final twist. The original plan was for MacArthur to invade Mindanao and the southern Philippines, then work his way north to Luzon. But in September 1944, Admiral Halsey's carrier aircraft raided the Philippines. They encountered surprisingly light Japanese air resistance. Halsey reported that Japanese air power in the Philippines was weaker than expected. This created an opportunity to change the plan. The new proposal: skip Mindanao entirely. Go straight to Leyte in the central Philippines. This would accelerate the liberation timeline. Put American forces in a central position to threaten all the Philippines, save time and resources. Take advantage of weakened Japanese defenses. The decision. The Joint Chiefs were meeting in Quebec with Churchill and British leaders. The proposal to skip Mindanao and go straight to Leyte was presented. Marshall sent a message to MacArthur asking his opinion. MacArthur agreed immediately he'd get back to the Philippines faster. The decision was made in days. Leyte would be invaded in October 1944, 2 months ahead of schedule. The irony. The Navy's reconnaissance created the opportunity. MacArthur took advantage. The result was a compromise that served both strategies. But it also created the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the largest naval battle in history, because Japan committed its entire remaining fleet to stopping the Philippines invasion. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, strategic vindication. October 23, 26, 1944. The Battle of Leyte Gulf. Japan's navy made a desperate attempt to destroy the American invasion fleet at Leyte. They committed virtually every remaining capital ship. The battle was a catastrophic defeat for Japan. 4 Japanese carriers sunk, 3 battleships sunk, 10 cruisers sunk, 11 destroyers sunk. Japan's navy effectively destroyed as a fighting force. MacArthur's argument: the Philippines invasion had forced Japan to commit its navy to a decisive battle. This proved the Philippines were strategically vital. Japan couldn't afford to lose them. By invading the Philippines, MacArthur had lured Japan into a battle that destroyed their naval power. This was strategic genius. The Navy's counter-argument: Japan committed its navy because MacArthur's invasion threatened their supply lines to Southeast Asia. But those supply lines could have been cut by continuing the Central Pacific Drive and taking Formosa. The Navy's carriers and surface fleet won the Battle of Leyte Gulf, not MacArthur's ground forces. The Navy would have won any naval battle where Japan committed its fleet, regardless of location. Leyte Gulf proved the Navy's supremacy, not the necessity of invading the Philippines. The reality: both arguments had merit. The Philippines invasion did force a decisive naval battle, but that battle could have been fought elsewhere if the strategic plan had been different. What's undeniable is that Japan's navy was destroyed. Whether this validated MacArthur's strategy or Nimitz's naval power is still debated. The Philippines campaign, the cost. October 1944 through August 1945. The Philippines campaign, the scope. MacArthur's forces fought through Leyte, October-December 1944. Mindoro, December 1944. Luzon, January-August 1945. Dozens of smaller islands. The casualties? American casualties in the Philippines, approximately 62,000 killed, wounded, missing. Japanese casualties approximately 340,000 killed plus unknown wounded. Filipino civilian casualties estimated 500,000 plus, many from Japanese atrocities as they retreated. The strategic questions: were these casualties necessary? Could bypassing the Philippines have saved lives? The Navy argued, if we'd bypassed the Philippines and gone straight to Iwo Jima and Okinawa, we'd have saved those American casualties and liberated the Philippines through Japan's surrender anyway. MacArthur argued the Philippines' liberation cut Japan's resource supplies, destroyed their naval power at Leyte Gulf, and fulfilled America's moral obligations. The casualties were the price of honor. The unresolved debate. Military historians still debate whether the Philippines campaign was strategically necessary or MacArthur's personal crusade that cost unnecessary lives. What's clear is that MacArthur's political skill ensured his strategy was executed regardless of military merit. The parallel campaigns, Iwo Jima and Okinawa. While MacArthur was fighting in the Philippines, Nimitz's forces continued the Central Pacific drive. Iwo Jima, February-March 1945. A small volcanic island 750 miles from Japan, needed for emergency landing field for B-29s bombing Japan. The battle was horrific. 70,000 Marines assaulted the island, 27,000 American casualties, 6,800 killed. Virtually all 21,000 Japanese defenders killed. Some of the most intense fighting in the Pacific War. Okinawa, April-June, 1945. Large island, 340 miles from Japan, would be the staging base for invading Japan itself. The battle was even worse. 180,000 American troops, Army and Marines, 50,000 American casualties, 12,500 killed, 110,000 Japanese military killed, 100,000 plus Okinawan civilians killed, massive kamikaze attacks on U.S. fleet. The comparative analysis. Navy advocates pointed out Iwo Jima and Okinawa were clearly necessary for invading Japan. The Philippines weren't on the direct route to Japan. MacArthur advocates countered, the Philippines campaign occurred simultaneously with Iwo Jima and Okinawa. If anything, the Philippines diverted Japanese forces that would have made Iwo Jima and Okinawa even bloodier. The truth. Both campaigns were necessary within their respective strategic frameworks. The debate wasn't about whether to fight these battles, but whether both strategic approaches needed to be pursued simultaneously. The post-war reckoning: who was right? August 1945. Japan surrendered after atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The strategic debate became a historical question. Was MacArthur's insistence on the Philippines vindicated or proven wasteful? Arguments: MacArthur was right. The Philippines' liberation fulfilled America's moral promises. Leyte Gulf destroyed Japan's navy, cut Japan's access to Southeast Asian resources, liberated millions of Filipinos from brutal occupation, provided excellent bases for further operations. Arguments: Nimitz's approach was better. The Philippines weren't necessary to defeat Japan. Could have been liberated through Japan's surrender without direct invasion. The Central Pacific route was more direct. Philippines casualties, 62,000 Americans, might have been avoided. Resources devoted to Philippines could have accelerated other operations. The unresolvable question: would bypassing the Philippines have led to faster victory with fewer casualties? Or did the Philippines campaign significantly contribute to Japan's defeat? We can't know. History doesn't offer controlled experiments. What is clear? The decision to return to the Philippines was as much political as strategic. MacArthur's political skill ensured his plan was executed. The military merit of that decision remains debated. The service rivalry, deeper than strategy. The MacArthur-Nimitz dispute wasn't just about the Philippines. It reflected deeper Army-Navy rivalry, the historical rivalry. Army and Navy had been rivals since the nation's founding. They competed for budgets, prestige, and political influence. World War II intensified this rivalry because both services were massively expanded and both played critical roles. The Pacific Theater split. The decision to split the Pacific into MacArthur's Southwest Pacific area and Nimitz's Pacific Ocean areas reflected inability to agree on unified command. This created inefficiency, duplicate logistic systems, competing priorities for resources, coordination challenges, two parallel strategies instead of one unified approach. The waste. Resources were duplicated, operations were sometimes redundant, intelligence was not always shared fully. A unified command under either MacArthur or Nimitz would have been more efficient, but neither would serve under the other, and neither service would accept the other service's commander as supreme. So Roosevelt and the Joint Chiefs accepted inefficiency to manage egos and service rivalries. The personality factor, ego and strategy. How much did MacArthur's ego and political ambitions influence strategy? The case that ego dominated. MacArthur's "I shall return" promise was personal branding, not strategy. His insistence on the Philippines was about his legacy, not military necessity. His political maneuvering, cultivating media, working with Republicans, building public support, showed he cared as much about his image as about winning the war. His post-war behavior, staying in Japan as Supreme Commander, considering running for president, revealed a man who saw military command as a path to political power and historical greatness. The case that strategy was genuine. MacArthur's Philippine strategy had legitimate merit. Cutting Japan's resource supplies, liberating allies, securing strategic positions, these were valid military objectives. His political skill was necessary to overcome Navy resistance. Without his maneuvering, the Philippines might have been bypassed and millions of Filipinos left under Japanese occupation longer. His ego and his strategic judgment weren't mutually exclusive. A man can be both egotistical and right. The balanced view. MacArthur's ego and strategic vision were inseparable. His belief in his own genius drove both his legitimate strategic insights and his political maneuvering. Would a less egotistical general have pursued the Philippines as aggressively? Probably not. Was that a good thing or bad thing? History doesn't provide a clear answer. The Roosevelt factor, political management. Roosevelt's handling of the MacArthur-Nimitz dispute reveals much about wartime leadership. The political calculus. Roosevelt recognized that MacArthur was politically untouchable. Firing him or overruling him completely would create massive political problems. Roosevelt also knew the Navy's strategic arguments had merit. Bypassing the Philippines might have been more efficient. So Roosevelt chose both strategies, letting MacArthur return to the Philippines while supporting Nimitz's Central Pacific drive. The leadership question. Was this wise leadership, managing egos and maintaining unity, or was it weak leadership, failing to make hard choices and accepting inefficiency? Arguments for wise leadership kept both MacArthur and Nimitz committed to the war effort, avoided political crisis, prevented service rivalry from paralyzing operations, allowed both strategies to prove their value. Arguments for weak leadership failed to choose the most efficient strategy, accepted waste and duplication, thus let personality drive strategy, potentially prolong the war and cost lives. The reality: Roosevelt was a political leader managing a political war. Military efficiency was important, but maintaining political support and service morale was also essential. A more authoritarian leader might have imposed a single strategy, but America's democratic system required managing consensus and egos. Roosevelt did this successfully. The war was won. Both MacArthur and Nimitz remained committed. Neither service felt betrayed. Whether this was optimal military strategy is debatable. Whether it was necessary political management is clearer. It probably was. The legacy: post-war Pacific strategy. The MacArthur-Nimitz dispute shaped post-war American strategy in the Pacific. MacArthur's victory. MacArthur became Supreme Commander of occupied Japan. He shaped Japan's post-war reconstruction and democracy. His vision of America's role in Asia as liberator and protector became policy. The Philippines remained an American ally and strategic partner. MacArthur's liberation was remembered as America keeping its promises. Nimitz's legacy. The Navy's Central Pacific bases, Guam, Okinawa, the Marianas, became permanent American positions. They remain strategically critical today. Naval power became central to American Pacific strategy. The Navy's argument that controlling sea lanes and island bases was essential proved prescient. The synthesis. Post-war American Pacific strategy combined both visions: Army presence in allied nations like the Philippines and Japan, Navy control of sea lanes and island bases. Both MacArthur and Nimitz shaped the Pacific order that persisted through the Cold War and continues today. In this sense, both were vindicated. Both strategies contributed to American dominance in the post-war Pacific. The counterfactual: what if Nimitz had won? What if Roosevelt had sided entirely with Nimitz and bypassed the Philippines? Possible outcomes. The Philippines would have remained under Japanese occupation until Japan's surrender. This might have saved 62,000 American casualties, accelerated the Iwo Jima and Okinawa campaigns, potentially ended the war earlier, avoided the Battle of Leyte Gulf, though Japan's navy might have been destroyed elsewhere. But it also would have left millions of Filipinos under brutal Japanese occupation longer, broken MacArthur's promise and damaged American credibility, created political crisis in the United States, potentially made MacArthur a dangerous political enemy, changed post-war American-Filipino relations. The unknowable. Would bypassing the Philippines actually have ended the war faster? Would Japanese forces in the Philippines have surrendered peacefully? Or would they have massacred Filipino civilians as they did in Manila? Would MacArthur's political opposition have damaged Roosevelt's ability to govern? Would it have affected the 1944 election? We can't know, but the risks were real enough that Roosevelt chose not to take them. The final assessment, the duel's outcome. So who won the strategic debate between MacArthur and Nimitz? MacArthur's victory. He got his return to the Philippines, his strategy was executed, his promise was fulfilled, his legacy was secured. Nimitz's victory. The Central Pacific Drive continued. Navy bases became permanent strategic positions. Naval power proved decisive in the Pacific. The real answer: both won because Roosevelt refused to choose between them. Both strategies were executed. Both contributed to victory. But the deeper question is whether this was optimal. Did executing both strategies waste resources and prolong the war? Or did the combination prove more effective than either alone would have been? Military historians remain divided. Some argue MacArthur's political maneuvering cost unnecessary lives. Others argue his strategic vision was vindicated by results. What's undeniable is that MacArthur's political skill was as important as his military talent. He understood that in a democracy, military strategy cannot be separated from political reality. Nimitz was the better pure strategist. MacArthur was the better political operator. In the end, politics determined strategy as much as military merit did. Conclusion: the battle behind the battle. The Pacific War was fought on two fronts, against the Japanese and within the American High Command. MacArthur versus Nimitz, Army versus Navy, political maneuvering versus military efficiency, personal ambition versus strategic optimization. Two of the war's most powerful personalities fought each other as fiercely as they fought the enemy. The battle for Pacific strategy was won not on military merit alone, but through political skill, media manipulation, and bureaucratic maneuvering. MacArthur promised to return to the Philippines and used every political tool available to ensure that promise was kept, regardless of whether it was the most efficient strategy. Nimitz pursued the Central Pacific Drive and proved naval power could strangle Japan, but couldn't overcome the political reality that abandoning the Philippines was politically unacceptable. Roosevelt chose both strategies, managing egos rather than optimizing efficiency. This preserved unity and morale but accepted waste and duplication. The result? Both strategies contributed to victory. Both men secured their legacies. Both services emerged from the war powerful and vindicated. But the question remains: how many lives were lost because strategy was driven by politics and personalities rather than pure military merit? We'll never know. History doesn't offer do-overs. What we do know is that the battle between MacArthur and Nimitz shaped not just how the Pacific War was won, but how America would project power in the Pacific for generations to come. The duel of titans ended with both men victorious. Whether that was wisdom or waste depends on whether you value political management or military efficiency more. In war, both matter. In democracy, politics often wins. The battle for Pacific strategy proved that the most powerful personalities don't just shape how wars are fought, they shape which strategies are even considered. MacArthur and Nimitz both understood this, and both used it to ensure their visions shaped history. The war against Japan was won, but the battle between these two titans shaped what that victory meant and how it was achieved. That battle, fought in conference rooms, in meetings with Roosevelt, in media campaigns and bureaucratic maneuvering, was as significant as any battle fought in the Pacific. And in that battle of personalities and politics, both men could claim victory. Even if the price of that dual victory was measured in lives that might have been saved if egos had been smaller and strategies had been unified.